Now we're moving on to the French tulip. This is the small flower I'm going to use as the featured flower on the cream and black toile and French stripe cake. The French tulip is a great little flower. This can be used on its own, as you will see a little later on the cake, or you could mix this with other flowers. This is a good size to mix with roses or peonies or other flowers for a wedding cake. Today I'm going to be making the tulip in white, but this could also be made in many other colors to fit in with your color scheme. When we make the tulip, the first thing is to make the cone. This can be made in two ways. One of them is to use a polystyrene cone. This is a small size rose cone. Using the pointed end of the knife tool, I will make a small hole in the end. Taking a 20 gauge wire. Now this doesn't matter whether we use green or white wire because this will be covered with tubing or with tape a little later on. I will make a small hook on the end of this with a pair of pliers, and then we'll take a little hot glue. So I will just put some hot glue onto the end of the hooked wire, and then I will then insert this into the cone. This just takes a few seconds to set, and this is then ready to attach the petals to this. Now if you are going to use this method and are going to make a white tulip, the cone can be left just as it is here. If you were going to be making tulips, for example, in pink, what we would then do is I would take a piece of paste of the same color I'm going to make the petals, about approximately number 6 size on the size guide, just like a large pea-sized piece of paste. Take a little Crisco and just knead this into the paste, because sometimes you will see just the very top of the cone, so if you were doing colored petals you will need to make sure this is covered over. Flatten this out like a small pancake, then just turn it over. I will brush a little egg white onto the surface of this, and then we will just mold this onto the top of the cone. Then just bring this down with your finger, so just using your finger, just smooth this down the side of your cone and re-emphasize this point on the top. So it's almost like a little snow cap, but this is only necessary if you're going to be doing any color other than white tulips. The second method for making the tulip center is to use a piece of gum paste. I take here some half-width floral tape. This is a light green floral tape. I'm going to stretch the floral tape slightly so it will stick to itself. Again, taking a 20 gauge wire, either green or white wire. I will wrap around once, and then I'm going to now make a floral tape bud. To do this, I will then go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Taking then my pair of pliers, I will hook the end over, and we'll go around a further 10 times to make a floral tape bud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we'll just come down the wire approximately about 2 inches. If I'm going to be using this method, I will need to take a piece of paste that is measured about number 9 size. Now again, I'm making white tulips, so if I was going to use the paste method, I would take a number 9 cone of white. If I was going to do red tulips or pink tulips, I would take a number 9 cone of pink or red, whatever color you're going to make the tulips. When we are measuring using the size guide, we're just going to measure a ball of paste so it sort of sits into the size guide. In the plastic size guide, because of the thickness of the plastic, normally about 1/4 of the paste is visible out of the base. When we use the paper size guide, usually about 1/3 is coming out the base, but the plastic size guide is a little thicker, so about 1/4 below. I will just take a little Crisco and knead into this, and then just take a little cornstarch on my fingers. We'll just make this into a ball shape. This is really not going to be seen, so it doesn't matter if it's not so perfect. I will brush some egg white onto the floral tape bud. We'll insert this into the ball of paste, and with a little cornstarch on my fingers, I will first of all just mold this around the base to secure this so we don't have any gaps around the bottom. And now I will then just make this into a cone shape. Now this cone needs to be a comparable size to the styrofoam cone As you can see, this is about the same size as the styrofoam cone, and that's the shape we needed as well. So if you have a styrofoam cone, use that as a guide. So if you are using this paste method, this now needs to dry for ideally about 2 or 3 hours before we could start work on this. So this method is fine if you have time to let this dry. The styrofoam method is ideal if you have to make the tulips in a hurry and you need to work on them straight away. This also, of course, will make the tulip a little heavier, so sometimes it's an advantage to use the styrofoam cone to make the tulips more lightweight. We now move on to the tulip petals. Just take a piece of paste of your petal color of your choice, approximately number 12 size. This doesn't have to be measured perfectly because this is just going to have excess. I'm going to roll this into a sausage, and I'm going to place this over 3 ridges on my cell board. Because we have to do 6 petals, it's easier to do 3 petals and then make another 3. Flatten this down, and then I will just dust a little cornstarch just on the top of the sausage. Don't put cornstarch on the board initially because you'll fill the ridges up. And I'm going to now roll over so I can just start to see the ridges through the paste. Peel this off and turn this over. Dust a little cornstarch onto here. Taking my French tulip cutter, I will cut out so that the ridge is approximately about 3/4 of the way through the cutter. Just using your thumb, this will clean off the excess paste. So then we're going to now take the 3 petals and we'll put these into a plastic flap to stop these drying. So this will just go into a plastic flap like this. And then we will continue with another 3 petals. So after cutting out the second set of 3 petals, this will mean we have a total of 6 petals, which is what we need per tulip. You can cut out, for example, 12 or 18 petals, but I'd suggest putting just a moist towel on the top of the flap just to keep the condition of the petals nice and cool. So they don't dry out. We're then going to move on to take my resin veiner. This resin veiner can be used for different sized tulips, and you can actually make a larger tulip than the one we're doing with the same veiner. Taking the petal, I'm going to take the ridge side down, and I will place the square end of the petal in the square end of the veiner. Then just take a little cornstarch on your thumb, and you're going to just press in with your thumb. Now, you either can use your finger or you can use your thumb to press the paste in. So you just want to press this in. Another alternative method you could use, which is if you had longer fingernails, you would make a slit in the paste, would just be to use a piece of foam like this and just press in with your piece of foam. Once we get to that stage, we take the petal out. So the ridge has then helped to form this nice shape on the petal. We place this onto the soft side of the cell pad. So I have the ridge side down and the flat side towards me, and I'm just going to soften just slightly around the top half of the petal using a technique like you'd erase on with a pencil on a piece of paper, just slightly half on and half off, just on the top half of the petal on the flat side. And I will place this into a plastic cup. So then I will take my next petal. Just going to lay the petal in, so remember ridge side down, use a little cornstarch, just going to just press this in with your thumb. So what's happening is the ridge is actually helping to form the design on the petal. And then just place it onto your pad on the soft side of the pad and soften around the top half of the petal. We will then move on to the third and final petal of our first 3 petals. And then these are going to be attached to our cone before we proceed with the next 3. But press firmly to actually press that into the ridge from the veiner. Because you can see the veiner actually has this sort of ridge and recess. By having the ridge in the paste, this will help to fill up to give the detail. And then we're going to soften around the top half of the petal. Sometimes these tulip petals can be made more frilly or less frilly depending upon the variety. Now I'm going to take my cone. This could be my styrofoam cone or could be my paste cone. I will brush egg white all over the surface of this. Then I will take my petals one at a time. I will put the ridge side on the outside, and the square end of the petal is going to just be attached. So the square edge of the petal is going to be attached where the wire is. You're just going to mold this around so the first petal will go on into position. Now the second petal will then go, and we have 3 petals. You want to just sort of tuck that inside the first petal, because these are going to form a slight spiral. So this will give me my second petal, so these will overlap each other. This is going to be a little unstable to start off with until we get the third petal on, and then we can stick these down. And then my third petal will tuck inside the second petal and will sit on top of the first. This technique of making a spiral we use on many different flowers. So you can see these petals will spiral into each other. Now then we're going to just brush a little bit of egg white just on the inside of the petal that's going to overlap. And this is going to help to make everything much more stable. So a little bit of egg white, a little bit of egg white here. So these first 3 petals will form a spiral. Just going to just mold around the base to secure these at the bottom. And then in the top here we want to create a sort of spiral. So just going to use your fingers here and just almost just sort of pinch these to make a slight V shape in the top, and then you can use a toothpick or you can use a stick like this. It's going to just help to create your sort of center. So you want to get this nice tight sort of spiral in the top here like this. So this will give me my spiral at the top of my tulip. So you can see how you have this spiral, but ideally you don't want to be able to see the cone through the inside, but if you can see the cone, because you've got this the same color as your petals, it's not going to notice. So this will be the first stage petals of the tulip. Once we have completed the next 3 petals, this time I'm going to brush my egg white on the inside of the petal about halfway up the 2 sides and about halfway down the center. Now we have 3 gaps. You can see here in the cone 3 gaps. So you position these petals so each petal will sit on a gap, and you just press the bottom half of the petal on. So as you can see, this is going to be pressed on so the square end of the petal goes at the base. Again, the ridge side will come out. Then you will move on to the second petal. Go down just about halfway up 2 sides and down the center. And then will be my second petal. And these petals usually just sort of sit. Now there's going to be a very slight overlap. So there's just a little tiny overlap here, just about a 1/16 of an inch, where one petal will go over the top of the other. But this is not like an overlap like we had on the first 3 petals. Now some varieties of French tulip have more frilly petals, so you can make them more frilled. You can also ruffle these like a small parrot tulip. So there are different effects you can create with these. Also, some of these varieties are rounded, so you can actually just cut the point of the petal off. Now these petals are going to just have a very slight overlap, so just use a little tiny bit of glue here, egg white just where the petals overlap, but this is not so much of an overlap as we had before from the previous petals. Now because a tulip, like the lily family, doesn't have any calyx, we have to pay a little bit of special attention to the base of the flower. I'm just going to just work the paste down at the bottom to make this nice and smooth. And what I like to do is, taking a square end of a toothpick, I like to just press around the base here to almost make that base square, so that when we put the tube in, or you're going to add tape to this, your base of your tulip has a more realistic look to it, because a tulip in real life has a fairly sort of square fused base. Once we get to that stage, we then can go ahead and do the tubing on this, or add the wires, and then we will let this dry a little bit. Now when we are doing tulips, there are 2 ways we can finish them off. One of them is to take plastic tubing. This is small 3mm plastic tubing. This is great because it looks very realistic on the tulip, because in real life a tulip has a thick stem. So you decide how much of the tulip stem you need to have covered. You will then cut this with a pair of scissors. This is sold in a 5-yard pack, so this goes a long way. And I use this on Gerber daisies and calla lilies and other flowers. And you're just going to slide this up the wire like this. And then you can use a little bit of super glue, or you can use a little bit of hot glue just to glue this where this meets. So just where that meets, you just use a little bit of glue, and this will just glue the base of the stem in place to stop this sliding. So this will give me my stem, and so this will give me my stem technique. So that is one method we can use. The second method we can use is to take, this is another tulip I've made, to take 2 additional wires, and these can be 22 gauge wires or 20 gauge wires depending on how long you're going to have the stem. And then what you would do is you take some floral tape, and you then would start the floral tape and slide this up to the base. This, as you can see, again means that the stem of the tulip is going to become in proportion with the flower. Now if you're really not going to see the stem, if you were doing these in a posy or an arrangement where you're not going to see the stem of the tulip, then you can just leave it on its existing 20 gauge wire because it's not going to be noticed and is easier to arrange into a spray. I only use the tubing method, or the adding the extra wires, when I'm actually going to be able to see the stem of the tulip to help give them a more realistic effect. For colouring the tulip, I'm going to use some Super Pearl. I'm just going to brush a little Super Pearl. This is a dry tulip I made a couple of hours ago, so this is now dry. So a little Super Pearl is dusted over the surface, all over the tulip. Then I will move on to take in some pale yellow. This actually is a daffodil yellow. I've added cornstarch to it to make it paler. And I'm going to just brush this slightly creamy yellow about halfway up each of the petals. So this is going to be brushed up just about halfway up each petal. So this will just give me a nice sort of soft creamy yellow color, because especially with doing white flowers like gardenias or orchids, usually I would use some of this soft yellow on them to make them look more realistic. And then I have here some pale moss green. So this is moss green which has been mixed with cornstarch, and I'm going to, you notice when I'm working with the green, I'm working from the bottom of the petal coming up, and I will bring the green up just up the base. This is about a third of the way up the petal. Don't do this with the brush because we want the color to fade off as we come up. And as we will come down the petal here, so this will give me my green color at the base. And then I will put just a little bit of green in between the petals where the 3 additional base petals were. And just brush a little bit of green right at the base here just to give me my coloring onto my tulip. This is a very simple coloring. Sometimes we do painting on tulip like parrot tulips, but this is a simple coloring. Then I have here a steamer, and I'm just going to just gently steam the tulip petal just to set the color, and this will, when it's dry, give a nice slightly waxy look using the pearl dust. So here we have our finished tulip. Moving on to the leaves of the tulip, we're going to take some moss green. This is approximately number 13 size. Remember, when you're measuring for rolling over the ridge, this is just an approximate size we need. Work a little Crisco into this paste, and I will then roll this into a sausage. Now this time I'm rolling this on the long ridge, that is the ridge here. This I use for leaves like magnolia leaves and longer, larger leaves. Again, just dust a little cornstarch on the top. I will roll the paste from side to side, and I will then roll the paste a little longer so it is big enough to cut out the, and then I will roll the paste off the edge of the board, so I actually expose the ridge, which is where the wire has to go into the leaf. Taking a 22 gauge wire, I will then dip the end into egg white, and I'm now going to thread this into the ridge. Now when we do this, you want to thread this in, twisting this as it goes into the leaf, so it almost tickles your finger as it goes in. So I'm actually twisting this wire, And you can see how this is sort of drilling its way into the paste here. And this wants to go in about 3.5 to 4 inches into the paste. So as you can see here, we're just about 3.5 inches, so just approximately 3.5 to 4 inches into the paste. Now we're going to just carefully lift this off of the board and turn this over. Now sometimes you may find the wire splits the paste a little bit. If that happens, all you need to do is just press this with a Dresden tool. As you can see, this is perfectly okay in there, but if it does split the ridge here, just press it back into position, because this won't be seen when it is finished. Taking the cutter, this is my tulip leaf cutter. I'm now going to place the tulip leaf cutter onto the top here. I'm going to press this. Now using this technique, of course, the wire, as you can see, is here in the cutter. So what I'm going to do is just going to use my metal knife tool just to trim 2 ends here so that it will cut through where the wire is pushing into the cutter. Remove this from the cutter. Now these leaves can be made smaller. The long leaf that I've used on the cake, that you'll see a little later on, was a little long, so I actually just cut this a little bit by hand. Or you can actually just take the cutter, and what you can do is you can just move the cutter up or down. So if you wanted to make a smaller tulip leaf, we could now recut this to actually remove this part from the leaf, so you can make different size leaves. Once we have got this into position, I'm going to just mold this around the base. So we just will mold around the base of the tulip. Then I will take my corn husk veiner. This is a number 22 veiner, is what we refer to it as. This is a corn husk veiner. Taking a piece of thin foam, I will fold this. I have the flat side down onto the veiner, and I will press this onto the back. I use this in my classes for the bird of paradise, for the pod on that. I also use this for bamboo, for Italian ruscus, certain other things that have this type of veining. Also some of the orchid family, like the Fias orchid, is veined onto this also. So you just continue this along, so you can see this will give you a really nice veining onto the tulip leaf. We're then going to place this onto the soft side of the cell pad, and I'm going to take my stick here. I'm just going to just soften around the edge here. This can be done with a large cell stick or a medium pin. Just going to just soften around the edge just to give you a little bit of softness around the edge of the leaf. So you can use a large cell stick or a medium pin. I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to take this and I'm going to pinch this. So I'm actually going to pinch a crease down the center of this, a little like a taco shell here. So just going to pinch this down the middle like this. And then finally we're going to take your small cell stick. Now we need to hollow the base of the leaf by bringing this off the edge of the pad and just going to pinch the paste around here, because in real life a tulip stem, it comes up and the leaf actually sort of wraps around that. So this is emulating what the tulip stem will come into there. So the actual stem of the tulip, when it sort of sits into here, this will sort of wrap around the tulip stem like this. So you need to make that hollow in the tulip at this stage, in the tulip leaf. Now then you can just leave this to dry, and usually I just leave this to dry on the pad or onto a piece of foam. You can bend this like this. You can also bend the wire a little bit. You can also dry this over a foil former. But if you just sort of dry this in a slight curve shape, you can fold the end over if you wish to. The leaf will dry in a nice natural shape. You can just make a few little design details into there, and this will give me my tulip leaf. Once the leaf has dried for 2 or 3 hours, we can then use a little floral tape on the base of the leaf. Then I will then dust this. Now when I do the leaf, I will dust white dusting powder. This is a powdered titanium, and this is used to sometimes put white accent onto petals. I also mix this with powder colors when I'm wanting to make more of an opaque effect. For example, when I'm going to say do a purple orchid and I wanted to put a yellow throat inside the orchid, if I was just to use yellow on purple, the yellow wouldn't really notice, but if you mix the yellow powder with some of the white, it will make the effect more opaque. So I'm going to use this because most tulips have almost like a sagey color on the back of their leaves. This doesn't have to be a total color, but just a little color on the back. And then the front of the leaf is going to be dusted with moss green. Again, this is just going to just brighten this leaf up a little bit. So it's going to brush this over the surface with some moss green. Now tulip leaves sometimes can be more of a spring green, or could be a lime green, or more of a forest green, so you can do different colors. Once we have got the tulip leaf dusted, we're then going to glaze this. Now there are really two options we can use. First of all, this is the confectioner's glaze. This is going to make the leaves really shiny. When we use the glaze, normally for leaves I use what is called half-strength glaze. So you can buy these little empty bottles, so you would half fill this with glaze, and then you would top this up with vodka or with Everclear. When you do this, add a little bit of the vodka or Everclear at a time and shake this, because it's like making an oil and vinegar salad dressing. So this would be what I refer to as half-strength glaze. Once this is brushed onto the leaves, this glaze will stay shiny forever. This is used by the food industry for candy and certain other applications. You can also brush Crisco on the leaves. Any vegetable shortening can be brushed onto the leaves, but that glaze will only last for a few weeks and then will go matte again, like a matte finish. So I'm going to take a little bit of my glaze here, and I will then just brush this onto the leaf, and just going to brush this over the leaf, so this will then just be brushed onto the back of the leaf, and then will be brushed onto the front of the leaf. This glaze takes about 10 to 15 minutes to dry, depending on the humidity level. And once this is dry, this can then be arranged with the leaves and the flowers together. Another way we can apply the glaze is in a small spritzer bottle. So this is the half glaze, but this would be needed to be done in a controlled environment like a cardboard box, because of the atomizer. So you can just spray this into a cardboard box. That is another way this can be applied. As I explained, it takes 10 or 15 minutes to dry. So once this leaf is dry, we can then take the tulip that we made, and you can just take the tulip and the leaves and you can tape these together. Now of course you can have the tulip on a much longer stem than this, and then you will then put these together. Now if this was going to go onto a cake, you have several options. You can either just leave the tulips like this, so that these would go into a drinking straw into the cake, or you could actually continue the tubing along the base here. So if you want to make the tulip look like a real tulip, the leaf is usually attached a little way up the stem. So then what we would do is we would then take a little bit more tubing, we'd slide some more tubing up the stem here. So this will just come up the stem and just slide this up. Just squash this enough so you can get the tubing up the stem of the tulip. Sometimes you just need to use a little pair of pliers here just to hold this and just push the stem up to the base of the tulip. So this stem can go onto the tulip here, and then taking some wire cutters, if you want to make the tulip stem look very realistic, you can cut with wire cutters at an angle. This will cut this, and then just push the tubing up a little bit so you expose a little bit of the wire, and I just will trim the wire. So as you can see, this will then give me a little recess. Just retrim the stem if necessary. You have a nice cut stem. And then when you have tulips, they have like a light color in the inside of the stem. So this is just some royal icing. And what I would do here is I would just take a little royal icing and I would just fill in that cavity, and just using my finger would just smooth this off. So this represents the end of the tulip stem. And you will see these have been used on the cake in a moment, and I have the exposed stems on all of the tulips. So here you can see we have two tulips. These could just be laid onto the top of the cake, and then you wear the the stems meet here where my thumb and finger is, you could have a nice bow. This could be a paste bow or a ribbon bow like I showed on the patchwork tulips. But here we have our small French tulips with their leaves. Here you can see our French themed cake, now adorned with a fabulous spray of French tulips. Here they are used as the focal decoration on the cake. I've made 5 tulips, each of them are on slightly different length wires with the plastic tubing. I've also made some tulip leaves. The long leaf here was a slightly cut down version, as I demonstrated, of making the leaf. The 2 shorter leaves here, these have got a little French cut on them. These were made in the same way, but I didn't put the wiring quite as far. Once I cut out the leaf, I then actually just cut out with a pair of scissors to make a French cut. In making flowers, fresh flowers, a lot of times florists, when they're making a bridal bouquet, will actually make ribbon loops out of the tulip leaves. So here I have actually made these into the form of a loop while the leaf was still soft by bending the wire, and these leaves have then been stuck together with a little bit of egg white, and once they're dry have been dusted in the same way. Finishing the spray off, I have some black organza ribbon and also the 5 stems that have been used. Now the actual spray is being inserted into a drinking straw. This was a 4-inch piece of drinking straw that has been pushed into the cake, and then the wires from the leaves have been attached to the tulip stems, and they all go into this one stem in the middle of the cake, as wires should never be pushed directly into the surface of a cake. You should always use a drinking straw like this or a little plastic pick. This concludes the presentation, and I hope you have enjoyed this demonstration and video and DVD on French style decorating. I hope you will enjoy making some of these things on your own at home, and we'll try some of these ideas out on wedding cakes or special birthday and celebration cakes. So from me, it's au revoir, and thank you for watching this presentation. We will hope you will enjoy looking at some of our other videos and DVDs that we have available.